Hello, welcome to everyone who has signed on. Just a quick note to say that we'll be getting started in about 2 minutes. Bienvenue à tous ceux qui se sont inscrits. Nous allons commencer dans environ 2 minutes. Merci. Welcome everyone to this webinar organized by Environment and Climate Change Canada. My name is Jane Porter and I will be the moderator today. Bienvenue à ce webinaire organisé par Environnement et Changement Climatique Canada. Je m'appelle Jane Porter et je serai votre modératrice aujourd'hui. Thank you for taking the time to participate. Merci à tous d'avoir pris le temps de participer. Next slide. Une note à propos de la langue. La présentation sera dans les deux langues et nous vous répondrons dans la même langue que la question. Nous répondrons également aux questions en français dans la boîte de dialogue au besoin. Si vous voulez une clarification ou désirez faire répéter quelque chose en français, veuillez nous le demander dans la boîte de dialogue et nous ferons de notre mieux pour le faire. So slides will be in both languages and we will answer the questions in the language in which it is posed. If you have any other questions or clarifications, by all means, please use the chat. I think most of you already know this, but you can access the video recordings at the Government of Canada link that is provided there, as well as all of the slides from these last 5 webinars are available on the Stratos website. Alors, pour plus d'informations, cliquez sur le lien ci-dessous et aussi pour l'accès à la présentation, vous pouvez cliquer sur le lien de Stratos. Merci. Next slide. If you have any technical questions at all, please use the Zoom chat box. We are trying to separate. If you have technical questions, use the Zoom chat. If you have questions and answers, use the Q&A. So if you have any technical questions, someone from our technical support team will respond to you as soon as possible. If you're having problems with audio, please go back to the email and look for the Zoom telephone number to join us. Alors, si vous avez les problèmes techniques, utilisez la case Zoom Chat et posez votre question ou levez votre main et nous vous contacterons directement pour résoudre les problèmes. Utilisez le numéro de téléphone Zoom fourni dans le courriel si votre son ne fonctionne pas. Si vous avez des questions et réponses, les questions ou commentaires sur le contenu, tapez votre question sur le case Q&A et utilisez le bouton j'aime si vous acceptez le commentaire ou la question de quelqu'un d'autre pour voter. Nous ne serons pas en mesure de répondre à toutes les questions pendant ce webinaire, mais toutes les questions et commentaires seront examinés et résumés dans un rapport. So I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but you use the Q&A for all of your questions. Use the thumbs up to, if you agree with the question or comment, to bring it up to the top. And unfortunately, we don't have time to answer all of the questions, but we will be looking at all of them afterwards and summarizing them into a report. Thank you. Next slide. And with that, I will pass it to Danny Drouin for some opening remarks.
Merci, Jane. Juste peut-être un sound check en premier. Est-ce qu'on m'entend bien?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Merci. Alors, je vais faire ça assez rapidement. On est rendu à la 5e édition de ces webinaires. Donc, je voulais vous souhaiter la bienvenue. Je voulais aussi dire qu'on on avait gardé du temps libre pour ce 5e webinaire pour discuter d'enjeux qui avaient été soulevés, qu'on n'avait peut-être pas eu l'occasion de couvrir adéquatement dans les autres. Donc, j'espère qu'on a, avec cette opportunité, couvrir des sujets d'importance aussi. Si pour une raison ou pour une autre, il y a des besoins pour continuer des conversations, juste rappeler le 9 décembre étant la date pour soumettre des commentaires dans lesquels on va être à l'écoute d'autres enjeux aussi que vous voulez soulever. So I just want to say thank you everyone for participating. We have left this webinar, a section of it open to address issues that were previously addressed, but we warranted more conversation. So I hope we have covered those properly today, but if not, just want to remind everyone December 9th is the time for written comments, which we will be also looking for additional issues that may not have been covered during the webinars to be shared with us, and perspectives, views, and concrete proposals. Thank you. Alors, à toi, Jane. Merci.
Merci, Danny. Next slide. Today we'll have about a 20-minute presentation by Shannon, the manager of Plastics and Marine Litter Division, and then we will enter into the question and answers portion of this presentation, where Danny, the Director General of the Plastics and Waste Management Directorate, Ryan, the Director of the Plastics and Marine Litter Division, and Shannon will be answering your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up Shannon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. To start, I will also do a quick sound and visual. Can you see and hear me? Perfect. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 5th webinar. So this slide, our table of contents, it provides an overview of our discussion today. So we will start with a recap from our first 4 webinars, which were on the management framework for single-use plastics and performance measurement requirements for recycled content. So then we'll spend some time discussing extended producer responsibility, which is the 3rd main topic that's presented in our discussion paper. And also listed on the slide are topic areas where we've received feedback from some of our earlier webinars. And these are topic areas I will also be addressing today. Next slide. Donc, le but de la discussion d'aujourd'hui est de poursuivre le dialogue sur notre approche de gestion intégrée des plastiques à l'usage unique, qui a été présenté dans notre document de consultation. Nous le ferons en discutant du 3e sujet principal, qui est la responsabilité élargie des producteurs. En plus d'aborder certains des principaux sujets soulevés au cours des webinaires antérieurs, nous solliciterons également vos commentaires sur les éléments potentiels d'interdiction ou de restriction sur certains plastiques à usage unique. Next slide. So this slide provides a recap of the webinars we've had to date. So in webinar 1, we provided an overview of our recent publications. And here on the slide, we mentioned the science assessment of plastic pollution. We also published a proposed order to add plastic manufactured items to Schedule 1 of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And we also published the discussion paper on an integrated management approach to plastic products to prevent waste and pollution. And this discussion paper has been the foundation for the discussion in our webinars to date. And the key elements of our discussion paper are also listed here. So these include the management framework for single-use plastics, opportunities for strengthening end markets for recycled plastics, and advancing work on end-of-life responsibility. In webinar 2, we examined the management framework for single-use plastics in more detail. We looked at the first 2 steps in this framework, which are categorizing or characterizing single-use plastics based on a set of criteria and then setting management objectives. We also discussed the data used to support the development of the framework, as well as we touched upon innovative forms of plastic that may be under development or already available, and that could potentially reduce the environmental impact of plastic products and packaging, as well as improve end-of-life outcomes. In webinar 3, we discussed the 3rd step in the management framework for single-use plastics, which is choosing an instrument. And this is where we discuss the criteria considered when choosing either regulatory or non-regulatory instruments, such as distributional impacts. And last week during webinar 4, we looked at establishing performance standards for recycled content requirements. And this is where we started the dialogue on possible options for requiring recycled content, such as by resin or by product or sector, or even possibly taking a broad economy-wide approach. Next slide. Donc, cette diapositive présente un graphique de l'approche de gestion intégrée qui est décrite dans notre document de travail. Au cours des webinaires 1 à 4, nous avons abordé les premiers principaux sujets de l'approche de gestion intégrée, qui sont le cadre de gestion pour les plastiques à l'usage unique et les normes de performance, telles que les exigences relatives au matériel de contenu recyclé. Aujourd'hui, nous allons discuter du 3e sujet, qui est la responsabilité en fin de vie. Next slide. So this slide provides a visual of the management framework for single-use plastics. It presents the 3 steps in this framework that include categorizing single-use plastics, setting management objectives, and then choosing a risk management instrument. So in the first step, which is to categorize single-use plastics, the 2 main criteria used are whether or not a given item is either environmentally problematic, value recovery problematic, or both. And then once we've categorized or grouped these single-use items, we need to set management objectives. And these objectives will vary depending on the criteria met. So 2 examples of management objectives are presented on the slide. For single-use plastic items that are both environmentally and value recovery problematic, we'll want to set more stringent objectives that'll focus on eliminating or restricting their use to the extent possible. For items that, for example, are value recovery problematic, the risk management objectives may focus on increasing recycling or improving recovery rates. The 3rd step then is choosing the risk management instrument. And these instruments can be regulatory and non-regulatory, and there's flexibility in the type of instrument that's developed as well as its application. And examples of instrument include regulations, as well as voluntary instruments such as guidelines and codes of practice. Next slide. So this slide is on extended producer responsibility, which is an environmental policy approach in which a producer's responsibility for a product is extended to the post-consumer stage of a product's life cycle. So extended producer responsibility programs are internationally recognized as one of the most effective mechanisms to support the creation of a circular economy. So these programs are known to improve recycling rates, reduce litter, and create the conditions to incent efficiency and reduce costs for end-of-life management. In phase 1 of the action plan on zero plastic waste, the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, or the CCME, recognized that extended producer responsibility is essential to achieving zero plastic waste. And this action plan commits to facilitating consistent programs in this area. And on that note, it's important to note that extended producer responsibility policies are consistent across jurisdictions. So the more consistent these policies are, the more easily producers can lower their administrative costs and take advantage of efficiencies that flow from operating harmonized programs at a larger scale. And this can result in more effective extended producer responsibility and outcomes that bring us closer to our zero plastic waste objective. So at the moment, we're currently working with provinces and territories through the CCME to develop guidance that will facilitate the development of consistent extended producer responsibility for plastics across Canada. And this guidance is currently scheduled to be released in 2021. And it will include elements such as common material categories, product definitions, as well as performance standards. with the intent being that it will guide reuse and recycling programs. This guidance will also include options to encourage innovation and reduce costs, as well as to establish monitoring and verification approaches. So we want to recognize the important leadership at this point being played by provinces and territories in developing and implementing extended producer responsibility policies for sectors. And these include a number of sectors such as packaging, electronics, and single-use plastics. And at the same time, we also want to work with provinces and territories to make sure that these programs are more consistent, comprehensive, and transparent. And so this could include things such as exploring how gaps and inconsistencies can be addressed through national actions. And a few examples include potentially Canada-wide targets on technical standards, or addressing gaps through infrastructure needs, or even facilitating coordination and collaboration between governments and industry. Next slide. So we've already received some feedback on extended producer responsibility. And this feedback is showing that there is broad stakeholder support. It also points to the recognition of the importance of working together. So working with provinces, territories, and businesses. And it points to a need to determine, at least for us to determine our role and where we can continue to contribute to more comprehensive, consistent, and transparent programs across Canada. So on the previous slide, I did highlight the need for consistency. And so one area where this is important is the need for consistent data to be able to better measure performance and outcomes. So we have received feedback on the need to standardize data collection methods and to make data more available to the public. In addition, we've also received feedback that the federal government could establish a common set of Canadian protocols for producers to register and report quantities and compositions of their supply of plastic products and packaging. So at this point, we really encourage all stakeholders to give us your thoughts on these ideas, as well as other ideas you may have on the kinds of policy or other levers that we as the federal government may consider. And this could include, for example, areas where we're best placed to fill gaps or technical standards that could be developed overall to help improve the performance of extended producer responsibility programs. Next slide. So on this slide, we'll shift gears a little, and I'd like to begin discussing comments that have been raised on our management framework for single-use plastics. So the first area I would like to discuss are problematic plastics. So these are plastics that meet the criteria of being both environmentally problematic and value recovery problematic. And I would like to spend some time talking about value recovery problematic, which really looks at how effectively an item can be recycled and whether or not there are barriers to recycling rates. And one of the considerations I would like to focus on today is the work that's underway to address these barriers. So as an example, Environment and Climate Change Canada is providing support to a group of 5 companies in Quebec's food and beverage and packaging sector who've created the Circular Plastics Task Force, or Groupe d'Action Plastique Circulaire. And so this group will be working to identify and recommend solutions for optimizing the handling of plastics throughout the recycling value chain. Now, before I start discussing some of the other work that's underway, I would like to preface it by stating that we have received comments throughout these webinars suggesting that value recovery should look not only at recycling, but that it should also consider other aspects of the waste management hierarchy, such as opportunities for reuse or manufacturing. And we are exploring opportunities for exactly that, for reuse and manufacturing of plastics. So we're looking at things like barriers and opportunities for the uptake of reuse systems. We're also looking into opportunities for the remanufacturing of products. And these initiatives are part of our ongoing work to support a circular economy approach for the management of plastic products and waste, and to help implement our comprehensive federal agenda on zero plastic wastes. Now, these are a few examples of the work we're doing, and we're well aware that there are many other initiatives underway. And as this work continues, we'll want to look at how the outcomes and really consider how they influence this value problematic criterion in our management framework for single-use plastics. And this is an area where we really welcome your feedback. Now, the issue of value recovery also applies to alternatives such as non-conventional plastics. So although there are a number of challenges to overcome when using non-conventional plastics, such as compostables, there is the potential for these plastics to potentially reduce the environmental impacts of plastic products and packaging, as well as to improve end-of-life outcomes. So on compostability, we are aware of the challenges for composting facilities for composting facilities to process compostable or biodegradable plastics. We did also want to note that work, however, on standards development is ongoing. And in the new year, we will be working with the Government of Ontario to co-host a workshop that will bring together the key players in this industry to look at how we can start addressing this issue. So this is another area where we welcome your feedback, as it will help us determine whether and how to design risk management measures that both prevent plastic pollution and support new and innovative technologies that improve environmental outcomes and support the transition to a circular economy. So in particular, we're also looking for feedback on the single-use items that are identified by our framework that could be good candidates for non-conventional alternatives. So as an example, it's been suggested that food packaging applications where there's heavy food contamination may be one such application. And another point I'd like to make for this slide is linked to the last bullet, which points to areas for innovation for recycling. And on recycling, I would like to note that we have provided funding support for the Canadian Standards Association to look at gaps in recycling and collection, as well as areas where standards are needed. And one of the main gaps that they've noted in this work is really the need for consistent terminology. And so this report is also available online. Next slide. This slide highlights some of the questions raised during the first few webinars that are specific to how we intend to define the 6 single-use items listed here that are both environmentally problematic and value recovery problematic. So as noted on the slide, there are a variety of parameters that are considered, such as physical characteristics, function, and place of use. I can provide an overview of some of our initial thoughts based on the definitions found in other jurisdictions. And this is where it would be useful to hear from you to ensure that what we are considering really is relevant in the Canadian context. So for plastic bags, so we're really looking at defining these bags based on their function. Where they are plastic bags, they're intended to carry items from a store. So some jurisdictions, when defining these bags, have also added physical properties, such as the thickness of the bag or the fact they have handles. Stir sticks, most of the definitions we've looked at for stir sticks are linked to its intended use, which is to stir a beverage. For 6-pack rings, we found that these are mostly defined in terms of function and physical characteristics. So they're often considered to be devices used for packaging, transporting, or carrying cans or bottles with at least one hole. For food serviceware made from problematic plastics, there are 2 elements we're looking at for defining this item. So one being the plastic material and the other being the shape or form of the container, which gives it its function. For straws, we're looking at defining them in terms of their link to their primary function, which is that they're used to consume food or drink. And I think a point that was made in an earlier webinar, which I'd like to reiterate here, is that there have been some jurisdictions such as Vancouver and even the United Kingdom that have provided exemptions for accessibility reasons. And this is something we're also looking into. Cutlery, this is an item where its primary function is to consume food. And this could include things like forks, knives, spoons, sporks, and chopsticks. And another point I wanted to make that's also noted on this slide is that we're also considering how to best distinguish between the terms single use and reuse. And this is important because it provides clarity as we design our risk management instruments. So in an earlier webinar, it was mentioned that jurisdictions have taken different approaches to how this is defined. So as an example, some of our Atlantic provinces have looked at defining reusable, and some of the factors they consider when defining it is to ensure that the item is washable and capable of at least 100 uses. Other jurisdictions have looked at defining the term single use. So this was the approach taken in South Australia and the European Union, where it's defined as an item that is not designed to be reused for the same purpose. So, just sort of in closing on this slide, I do want to reiterate that these are some initial thoughts based on what we've observed has been done in other jurisdictions. And this is really where we welcome your feedback on really what is the best way to define these items. So if we move to the next slide. So this slide looks at where along the value chain we could apply a prohibition. So we have a number of options which are listed on the slide, such as the point of manufacture, import, and sale or offer for sale. So as noted in the second bullet under stakeholder feedback, we have options, again, on how this could apply to the 6 single-use items we're discussing today. And so to provide a bit of an overview, so manufacture and import really look at eliminating the supply of an item. So manufacture would eliminate our domestic supply, and then import would eliminate our supply from abroad. Sale and offer for sale would eliminate demand. And this is where we would really like to receive your feedback, again, to the application of how this could apply to the 6 single-use items we've been discussing today. In addition, we're also interested in hearing from people who may be impacted from these various options and what that could potentially mean to your business or your company. Next slide. So in this slide, I'd like to spend some time talking about exemptions and exclusions. So just to kind of sort of preface this discussion is we do want to make sure that whatever risk management we developed, that it is scoped appropriately so that we avoid unintended consequences. And so some of the experience we've observed in others jurisdictions is that certain single-use plastics may play important health, safety, or accessibility roles. So we want to hear from you in terms of the different applications of particular single-use plastics that may warrant these kind of considerations. And because hearing your feedback on the potential consequences will be important, particularly as we develop measures, because we will need to take these things into consideration. In addition, so we also recognize the potential for new and innovative technologies to improve environmental outcomes. And so some that I've discussed earlier in this presentation were the use of compostable, bio-based, and biodegradable plastics. And this is so we're aware that there may be cases where they do improve a product's environmental footprint or can help with increasing recovery rates when a single-use item becomes waste. And so this is where we want to hear from you on whether innovative or non-conventional plastics, such as compostable, bio-based, or biodegradable plastics, should be exempted. And if so, what should be considered when developing an exemption? Keeping in mind that we're really looking at striking that balance between maintaining our environmental objectives of zero plastic waste and at the same time fostering a circular economy for plastics. So if we move to the next slide, I did want to spend a few moments talking about the need for transition periods. So we have received feedback that time will be needed to deal with the challenges of retooling and re-engineering production facilities. And this is where this kind of input is important for us to hear. So we can develop instruments that minimize cost to business that really need the time to make changes to their operations. And so this is where your feedback will help us determine what kinds of transition or phase-in periods might be appropriate for each of the single-use items that we've been discussing today. So if we move to the next slide, so this slide hopefully is familiar to most, and it really provides that snapshot of where we are in our engagement process. So this is our 5th webinar, with our final one being a recap of what we've heard, and it will take place in January. And Danny mentioned at the beginning that our comment period is still open and that comments on our discussion paper will be wrapping up December 9th. And so I just wanted to reiterate that as well. And so if we move to the next slide. And so this slide provides a list of the webinars that have taken place to date, as well as the next one that's up and coming. And this list is also provided on our website. So at this point, if we go to the next slide, I think we'll pause. And Jane, back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. We'll be heading to the Q&A portion of this presentation. I just wanted to comment as well that some people are saying you're not always following the exact questions that are coming up in the Q&A, and we are looking at those. We are also taking a look at the questions that you posed when you registered as well. So we're doing a bit of mix of both and trying to answer as best as we can the themes and the topics that are coming up. So the first question, I think, is for Danny. I think this one is in the Q&A here. Specifically, please advise as per how best a municipality should navigate two somewhat conflicting regulatory considerations, as the feds are looking to ban numerous problematic plastic items post-2021. Consultations with stakeholders, and our province of Ontario is considering legislation to have many of these problematic plastic items included in curbside recycling programs. How should a municipality address this while pursuing long-range waste management master plan review update in 2021? Danny.
Merci, Jane. Thanks. This is an excellent question, and I would think it's always a question that we need to deal with when we look at regulations in a federation. So 2 points, I guess I want to say. Thanks for flagging this. That's a consideration that we will take on board. And 2, please continue to follow the file with us. Please continue to engage in conversation. Please share with us concrete ideas on how to address that consideration. This to me means quite a lot around complementarity of measures, and so how proposed measures and at multiple levels of governments, and how can they coexist together, be complementary to each other, and what are the risk of duplication. So so I'm gonna throw back the question to those who are asking that question in a way that would be very interested to see how you've dealt with this in other files, for example. But definitely there is an intertwine of different action by different level of governments, and how best can we reinforce each other. So that's something we'll be looking for advice and perspective in addition to that question that was posed today. Thanks.
Great, merci. Thank you, Danny. The next question is for Ryan about the methodology and approach. I have about 4 questions here, so you can answer the theme again. So first one is, the management framework for single-use plastics seems very arbitrary and unclear. Why were environmentally problematic and value recovery problematic chosen and not other criteria? What are the definitions of environmentally problematic? Example, what does prevalent in the environment mean? And will the government be providing clear definitions for the 6 items proposed to be banned? There is no clear definition in the management framework, and it remains unclear what exactly is being considered. You've asked for exemption considerations, but what specifically is being considered? Example, foodware is incredibly vague.
Okay, as always, Jane, there's a lot there in those list of questions. I think maybe I'll start kind of more broadly. I think the discussion paper itself, maybe folks view the architecture as rather simple, and perhaps this simplicity is what makes it feel like it might be arbitrary to some folks, but that, I assure you, it is not intended to be that. So the approach really proposes actions in 3 principal areas where immediate progress is needed to address plastic pollution and waste that exists in Canada, and also proposes the interventions that we might need to consider to take in order to address those issues in the marketplace. So just reiterating a little bit, just so that folks are it's kind of like I'm going back to the basics a little bit, but and Shannon's walked through some of this, but the first is a proposed a ban on select items to kind of reduce their presence in the environment. And this approach has been shown to be successful in other jurisdictions. So that's the first element that we're considering. And then the 2 additional proposed actions represent the other pillars of the circular economy. So stimulating the demand for recycling content, and then enhancing our ability to collect plastics through an extended post-consumer programs. So it's just important to note that, you know, we understand from other jurisdictions' experiences and our own that with those 2, the markets will not kind of self-regulate in order to recover more plastics, and that's why the proposals are being put forward in the paper. So I think that touches on a few of those. With regards to the definitions and the criteria, the discussion paper does propose those, and these consultations are being used to help us kind of rethink and refine our approaches to those definitions. We're using the feedback that we're getting to gauge if there are any of our definitions or approaches that are confusing and maybe are being misinterpreted as well too. We've already gathered some really useful insights on the concept of value recovery problematic, for example. And just with respect to the last question, in terms of the prevalent in the environment, we literally relied on litter data and the categorization efforts from several sources to identify what's frequently found in cleanup projects. So I think it's also maybe one last point, because I'm going on here a little bit, but I think it's important to point out that the list of items that we're considering or proposing for a ban are really small compared to what is found out in the environment. And we wanted to start with those candidates as a proposal, get feedback and see if that's an approach that we could implement and assess if there's successful results in those areas. So hopefully, Jane, that covers off on a few of those elements there.
Great, thanks so much, Ryan. Next question is for Danny about the recyclability and regulating product design. Is ECCC planning to regulate to avoid hard to recycle and non-recyclable plastics to enter the market, as this would definitely have a much needed impact on the end of life management of plastics? En français, ECCC prévoit-il réglementer pour éviter que les plastiques difficiles à recycler et non recyclables ne pénètrent pas sur le marché, car cela aurait certainement un impact bénéfique sur la gestion en fin de vie de les produits plastiques? Also related to this, is there a plan to reduce packaging and also to make it reusable, not recyclable?
Okay, thanks. I guess the first point I'd like to make is it's a bit what I've echoed for the first question that was posed around the municipalities and the provinces measures. Is we're committed to work with provinces, territories, municipalities, private sector. So the question posed here is extremely good, extremely useful. The discussion paper presents a proposed approach, so you can look at that approach and see and add additional ideas to this the approach we're presenting if necessary. We obviously know that if companies all agree to increase or decrease the complexity of the products they're putting in the market, so they are more recyclable than they are actually recycled, would be very useful. And on that, I would note few companies are actually moving that direction, especially in the food retail sector, which is useful and probably still quite a lot to do. But at the same time, this question is quite complex. And we know that kind of technologies are being developed. We also know that there's more products that are being recycled, but this is not equal across the country, and it's partially not equal across the country because of the EPR programs are not necessarily all harmonized as well. So what everything could be recycled doesn't necessarily get recycled across the country, or sometimes the costs are different that may or may not provide incentives to influence better product design. So in terms of, again, go back to the proposed approach on the discussion paper. There's a section on standards, there's sections on proposed restrictions and bans, there's sections on EPR, and this is exactly the type of input we're looking. So when we're trying to define like what's difficult to recycle, we've proposed an approach in the discussion paper for very narrow scope into the single-use plastics products. But from a national level, we would definitely be looking for your written comments on this, and also how can we best support the system in the context where we want to make sure that where the market fails to address issues, that we can act collectively, working with provinces and territories and others, but at the same time we're stimulating innovation. So again, maybe quite a long response to a short question. In that context, really looking for your views and perspective on how to address that issue. Thanks.
Thanks, Danny. Next question is on ban exemptions, or the ban and exemptions for Shannon. So one person wants to re-ask the question related to exemption to healthcare in regards to plastic items associated with patient care, as well as would food safety, food waste, and food security be factors to influence exemptions if alternative materials did not satisfy the existing standards of practice? Shannon?
Thanks, Jane. So I'll start with the question around plastic items associated with patient care. So for the 6 items that we are considering, short answer is yes, definitely. This is a consideration that we do look at. At the moment, we are only aware of straws where they are being used at times to administer medications to patients in hospitals and potentially other settings like long-term housing establishments. And so this is where definitely we are looking into something like that. However, for the other items, that we've been talking about through these webinars, if there are other applications that are specific to health related concerns, we would like to hear about them, especially in the area of patient care, because this is an area that, yes, that definitely we do look at and we have to address. Now, part 2 was sort of in regard to food safety and the use of alternatives. I think the short answer here is that whatever alternative is used, it has to be able to perform the same function. And we have been in discussions with some of our colleagues at Health Canada who deal with food safety. And so they're very much aware sort of what we're doing, the initiatives that we're pursuing. And so certainly this would be an aspect that would be taken into consideration.
Thanks, Shannon. Next question is on infrastructure and technology, and it goes to Ryan. We have several different stakeholder groups who are present during these sessions. And so I know you can't see each other, but we do have various groups here. So I'm going to share a few that are coming at us. So 1, instead of a ban, would it not be better to invest in infrastructure and expand the recycling definition to encourage new technologies? Plastics are recyclable through emerging technologies. Why not promote and support emerging technologies such as pyrolysis to generate more Canadian jobs and to be a world leader versus a ban and eliminate good paying jobs while decimating the plastic industry? Also, mechanical recycling inevitably results in loss of integrity of the recycled plastics. This means plastic recycled in this manner has a finite lifespan. It means we will always need vast production of virgin resin to replace the mechanically recycled plastic that is aging out of a circular system. Linear much. And chemical recycling is unproven and largely still in concept. There are no at-scale processes for chemical recycling of PE, PP, and PET. Closed Loop Partners estimates it takes 17 years for these types of projects to reach scale. So it's a sampling of comments. I'll pass it to you.
Jane, I think you kind of made a really good point in kind of the opening here. I think those sets of questions really kind of show the range of views, but also the range of approaches that are available and put forward by a diverse set of stakeholders here. So I think it's safe to say that we certainly agree that there are many different pathways that we could use to reach the objective and many technologies that could help contribute to a more circular plastics economy. But I think the important measure is really the effectiveness of each of the technologies and the approach and or the technologies and the products themselves as well too. Again, I would go back to the discussion paper, and the proposal is we would evaluate these technologies and approaches based on the outcomes. Does it result in a product that is environmentally problematic? Does it result in a product that is value recovery problematic? And I think that's a good point to go back to. And again, I think I say this in almost every response that we provide, but the proposed ban is really targeting a small percentage of these items and kind of avoiding the recovery and limited opportunities for recovery for those items. So maybe I'll just switch gears a little bit and talk about the government's approach and how we are kind of navigating and assessing kind of the alternative pathways that are available for us to move forward. The first one is that the government has been investing in supporting industry-led initiatives to examine these sets of issues. I think there's one great example. It's a project in Quebec, the Centre de Transfert Technologique en Écologie Industrielle. So this is a project that's been examining how to improve the accessibility to post-consumer feedstock coming out of material recycling facilities. That's just one example. The government has also invested $19 million in innovation challenges and funding small and medium-sized businesses to develop proof of concepts, and some successful proof of concepts have even been selected to receive $1 million to move forward towards commercialization. So those are some of the government measures that we're doing. And I think it shows that, you need a range of approaches and a range of solutions. That this isn't a singular kind of, there isn't a singular action that is going to address the entire system and, ensure that we move forward in a cost-effective manner. And just touching on the last point, kind of, you saw the back and forth on some of the alternative technologies. There's some more niche, smaller scale technologies currently available, such as chemical recycling. It's small but growing, and that could be a complement to the system that we currently have. And maybe just my last point is it's really important to remember that there are over 200 facilities in Canada that recycle plastics, and some 80 solely dedicated to recycling plastics as well too. And we just need to build on the foundation of the existing infrastructure that is there and navigate a path that moves forward from taking advantage of the processes that we already effectively have and are effectively using. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Jane.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Next question is on problematic plastics for Shannon. So a couple questions here. Black plastics made from HDPE and PP have economic value and as an input for the Ontario and Great Lakes automotive sector. Do not apply a simplistic ban on these materials, as it will impact our manufacturing sector as well as our plastics reprocessors. And coffee pods were included in the preliminary list of materials in the discussion paper, but were not included in Table 2 of the analysis of information of selected single-use plastics. Why not include coffee pods? They were obviously identified at one point, but it doesn't appear that any additional analysis was done on them, even though at minimum they meet 2 criteria. They hamper recycling systems and are non-recyclable.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I guess a couple things. So in terms of black plastics, so I do appreciate the question. And I will say that there have been a few throughout the webinars asking about, them and why we see them as problematic. And I just wanted to sort of preface this with, we have provided an initial definition of problematic, but it's not set at this time. And so, however, I did want to say that, we do see that some black plastics, particularly in the packaging stream, have had a tendency to have poor recycling rates. But we do recognize that they do present an outlet for some items with high recycled content. And also that not all black plastics are the same. So some are made with PET, which is the most recycled resin. So at this point, we don't have all the answers on how to best approach black plastics, but we are appreciating the variety of views that are coming in terms of how they are currently being handled in recycling streams. And this is really informative, and it will help better refine some of our approaches moving forward. But one thing also, you know, when we ask this question, it's really looking at, you know, our vantage point is coming at, you know, what are the items that we need to really look at that are problematic, that would we would want to look at in the scope of something we would want to prohibit. So it shouldn't really be, you know, that we're looking at putting a blanketed approach to black plastics, but it's really, you know, what are the things that are really turning up as litter in the environment? You know, or things that maybe we are seeing some impediment to effective recycling. So again, information that people have has been very useful. It's really helping us evolve our thinking. And we do want to recognize, you know, that it's not sort of a one size fits all. And we do intend to really tailor our applications in this regard. On the issue of coffee pads, I do want to say that I agree that they do make the criteria of value recovery problematic, but they're not found to be prevalent in the environment. And so this is where, you know, they're not meeting those two criteria that we had identified as being the ones where, you know, we recommend that risk management objective being a prohibition. But again, you know, this is our initial findings, and we do really look forward to hearing from a variety of stakeholders. And these are some really great questions, and I'm really happy that we're having them to be able to, you know, to really get into some good thinking on these issues. So thank you.
Good, thanks, Shannon. Next question is for Danny on extended producer responsibility, and 3 questions here for you related to this. How will the government move all provinces to a nationwide EPR model, which we expect would be more effective than the current patchwork approach? And right now, EPR is very different in each province. What will happen if a management objective is set to increase recycling of an item in a province that doesn't have strong EPR policies? It would seem that this cost to increase recycling rates would fall on municipalities if the producers are not responsible in that jurisdiction. As it stands, it doesn't appear that EPR will be required in all provinces and territories. How can we make sure the single-use plastic management objectives align with stronger harmonized EPR? And does the federal government have the jurisdictional power to harmonize the extended producer responsibility program with the provinces, or the provinces are responsible for this? Danny.
Okay, merci, merci Jen. Très utile. Several questions at the same time, but I'd say 3 points, I guess. First is, as the discussion papers is presenting, the federal government is currently working with the CCME and other jurisdictions to develop guidance to facilitate consistent EPR policies for plastics, and that guidance we hope will be a way to go through the process of greater harmonization. We recognize also, and we've been told by some provinces, we've been told by many businesses as well, we recognize that there's both the need to expand the programs to cover more plastics products, as well as to expand programs and cover greater geographic region across the country. If we really want to go through to a circular economy for plastic and zero plastic waste, and that in of itself would create at least in theory, will create the good quality feedstock that recyclers need, that would then stimulate investment in infrastructure and expansion of programs. That's kind of the economics behind this. We, as I again mentioned, the discussion paper presents an approach in which we are currently engaged. So we'll continue to work with provinces and territories to see how we can achieve more comprehensive, more efficient, more standardized EPR systems across Canada. And really, again, really looking forward for your comments on the issue. You have very different perspective, but all of those perspectives will be useful in our analysis. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Danny. A few more questions related to EPR for Ryan. So Europe is proposing EPR legislation by 2021 for food containers, packets and wrappers, beverage containers, cups for beverages, tobacco products, wet wipes, balloons, and plastic carrier bags. Example, 8 additional items. There's also a proposal to look at EPR for abandoned fishing gear. Producers will also be responsible for litter cleanup. Why don't you make these ideas the starting point for potential EPR expansion in Canada? Also, will Canada start to link to other EPR jurisdictions, for example, EU, to work towards a more harmonized and larger body of nations that have a better chance of moving the producer marketplace in the right direction? Canada on its own may be too small to make a difference. And EPR has not moved us towards circular economy, but rather towards recycling. We need to have a federal leadership to move us up the hierarchy away from recycling towards reuse and manufacturing.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I think just one small tidbit before I kind of dive into some answers is that I think I want you to know that we're certainly, there's 2 things actually. We're listening to stakeholders that do have an international presence and participate in extended producer responsibility programs on an international basis. So we're receiving feedback from those stakeholders on their participation across that. So that's kind of one source of information that we are reaching out on. I think the second point is too that, and I'll get to kind of a little bit of these details, but our team is actually reaching out. We had a call with the United Kingdom this morning. We're making inroads in chatting with France as well too about all of the issues and their experiences in developing EPR and single-use plastic bans as well too. So I just want you to know that we are committed to assessing the process and the results that are taking place in other jurisdictions and seeing what is relevant and could be applied in the Canadian context and, for potential options there. So just maybe touching on a few more points there is, EPR is one instrument to help achieve increased recycling and recovery rates for single-use plastics. And where EPR is the most kind of appropriate instrument, we'll certainly work with provinces and territories on addressing that. And I think that's an approach that will align well with actions being taken in some jurisdictions. And I won't repeat a lot of what Danny has already talked about with EPR, but one example is British Columbia, which amended its EPR regulation to include single-use plastics. So you can see there's some examples of where some of the overlap. Again, striving for kind of a consistent, comprehensive, and transparent EPR process. That's something that we certainly would work for. And as mentioned, definitely interested in working with the European Union to ensure that we could align, consider their experiences and learn from them and understand that we're certainly aware of the EU's work as well as other partners, and we continue to follow developments internationally to ensure Canada moves in the same direction as other jurisdictions. And again, we certainly welcome feedback from from stakeholders that have experience crossing over these domestic and international boundaries when it comes to EPR programs. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ryan. Next question is for Shannon on bio-based plastics. So a few questions here. Given that Italy has eliminated 20 billion pieces of LDPE plastics by mandating compostable plastics, how does Canada plan to leverage this knowledge, given that a majority of municipal population centers have composting facilities that accept compostable plastic bags? And while reviewing compostability of plastics, we need to be mindful of creating greater environmental challenges through the unintentional issue of the composting process creating microplastics in soil. And will products made from bio-based plastics be exempt from recycled contents requirements? Assigning composting as an end use is highly problematic. Excuse me. It will potentially limit the ability to certify compost for organic use. It will increase public confusion that we already have with current labeling. It will increase costs to screen plastics from compost sites, especially small low-tech rural sites. The costs will also be passed on to local governments and private compost sites and away from management of end of life by the producers. And based on our understanding of statements in the discussion paper, our city, an operator of an organics facility, has grave concerns about any thought that biodegradable of compostable plastics be exempt, given the confusion it could potentially cause processors and the public. So lots for you there. We only have a few minutes left. I wouldn't mind if you.
Thanks, Jane. And these are some great questions, actually. So what I want to do to sort of start with maybe putting some organization around my answer is just to say, you know, bio-based and bioplastic means a lot of things to different people. And I think this is where, you know, we really need to standardize our definitions and our terminology. But I see bio-based. So bio-based to me, it's really, you know, that it has bio feedstock as opposed to make the plastic as opposed to a petroleum-based feedstock. So then I see within sort of that umbrella of being bio-based, there's sort of the line where we have compostable, and those are things that are breaking down. And then we have the line where these plastics, you know, can be used in a number of applications, and they're not breaking down. They're just kind of behaving as sort of other plastics. So again, under bio-based, I see there's sort of two distinct prongs. So a number of the questions, Jane, that you've sort of presented here that speak to sort of the compostability, the biodegradability, that's really the prong where we're looking at, you know, things that could potentially, that would potentially, you know, be replacements for single-use items, you know, where there may be opportunities to look at sort of, you know, how can they be managed, you know, and we've kind of talked about, you know, can they be composted? And I see here you've mentioned that there's a number of concerns and issues, and we're very much aware of them. And that's where, you know, we really want to make sure that, you know, we're doing things right, and we're really sort of moving in step and listening to what we're hearing back, you know, making sure that things can really be managed end of life. And so this is where I think I mentioned during the presentation, we're doing some work with the province of Ontario. And so we're really looking at, you know, kind of getting together the key folks that are really on the ground to look at, you know, what are some solutions? You know, are there a few things that maybe we can pilot that maybe will work? And then, you know, what are other areas where we need to invest more in that sort of compostability? One area is the area of standards. So under the CCME action plan, we do have, you know, the need for standards for bio-based content, and it's really to recognize the need to work these things out. So that's again through the compostable, biodegradable part of a bio-based plastic. You know, on the other side, when we're talking about plastics that are made, say, from bio polyethylene or bio polypropylene, some of these plastics, you would never know that they had a bio-based feedstock because they perform just as the same as any other plastic. And I think these are plastics where my understanding is, you know, is that we should be okay to see them sort of entering recycling streams because they do have the same characteristics as a conventional plastic. You know, so again, so we're looking at the issue. We're very mindful, but I just want to make sure that, you know, we're kind of unpacking it sort of appropriately. You know, and again, yeah, we are aware of sort of the complexities and some of the concerns that have certainly been raised in the questions that have come forward.
Thanks, Shannon. I realize we're going a little bit over. We have one last set of questions. If you have to leave, please do, and you can access the recordings afterwards. Last one on enforcement, again for you, Shannon. Can you please speak to how you expect the bans or other management instruments to be enforced? How is our government working to ensure compliance to Canadian plastics policies from companies and products made elsewhere and sold in Canada?
Under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, there are a range of tools that we can use to investigate sort of instances of non-compliance and to take enforcement action where needed. And within Environment Canada, we do have an enforcement branch. And so this is a group that really looks at, and it's not just, you know, for our instrument, but really across the board prioritizing, you know, where are the instruments where there's a need to take action, you know, for non-compliance? What are some of the policies and procedures that are needed? And this is something too with instrument development, where we actually work very closely with our enforcement branch colleagues. And so this is really, you know, as sort of we get into the development stages, the conceptual stages, they're really there with us to do a bit of that, to do a bit of ground truthing, to really look at, you know, what are some options for being able to enforce or take action. In addition, we also have another group of colleagues that looks at compliance promotion. So this is where, you know, with the development of any instrument, what are the activities that are really needed to get out and to sort of make people aware of, you know, what the regulation or whatever instrument is all about. And I think, you know, in the past, I've certainly seen some really innovative and interesting ways that you know, compliance promotion can occur. And so this is where, you know, we sort of have a set process that we do follow for doing this. And again, it is something that, you know, we will be doing in step with other groups within Environment Canada.
Great. Thank you very much, Shannon. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your time and participation in this webinar and others if you've attended them. Merci beaucoup pour votre temps aujourd'hui et bonne journée à tous et merci, au revoir. Thank you. Goodbye.